Hello everyone and welcome to another video. My name is Lance and today we're going to be taking a look at Bloodborne's cutscenes. And we're going to be doing this using a developer feature I recently restored back into the game, which allows me to take free control of the camera at any time, even during these cinematic moments. This allows us to see what's going on behind the scenes and how certain tricks and effects are achieved that we were never meant to see. With that said, this is going to be a lot to cover, so let's just start things out with the game's introduction. This entire scene takes place from a first-person view with no camera cuts. First, the Blood Minister leans over the player, before a beast emerges and approaches, and finally a group of messengers crawl up and obscure our view. By taking manual control of the camera, we can see that the Blood Minister actually has to float up a little to achieve the angle at which we see him.
You may think it all a mere bad dream.
After this, the Scourge Beast and messengers spawn underground, waiting for their moment to be called into the scene. Some messengers even float in from somewhere further away before proceeding with their animations. When we discover Father Gascoigne, a cutscene shows him chopping into someone on the ground, their arm flailing into view at one point. With our free camera, across a number of cuts, we see his victim appear out of nowhere, and then a moment later disappear again. There's not a lot interesting about the scene where the player first enters Erden Chapel, although seeing that casual strut from another angle is nice enough. This brings us to one of the most mysterious cutscenes in the game, the moment when Vicar Amelia, off-camera, transforms into a terrible beast, something we only witness via the projection of a shadow. In order to achieve this effect, the Vicar is actually floating high up in the sky, close to a light source. At this moment she begins to contort as her beast form floats up towards her, slowly expanding in size and shape. This creates the appearance amongst the shadows that the beast has emerged from inside of her. This all takes place across a number of camera cuts, and throughout these the scene is rearranged dramatically. You'd typically never notice this as the cutscene camera masks these changes. Another cutscene that's covered in an air of mystery is the flashback that occurs showing Willem and Lawrence parting ways at Bergenworth University.
Made men by the blood.
We don't see Lawrence here, except for just barely when he steps up next to Willem for one brief moment. The scene cuts completely to black at another moment when he delivers a certain line.
I must take my leave.
By removing all the lighting effects and taking full control of the camera, we can see that it is in fact the character who would eventually come to be called Mikolaj that is present throughout this scene.
By the blood. Undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open.
Fear the old blood.
And the cut to black at the end is specifically authored to obscure
I must
this.
take my leave.
By the gods, fear it, Lawrence.
Interestingly, this entire scene takes place in a compartmentalized version of Byrgenwerth University that appears directly below the cathedral altar.
Oh, I know.
After we ourselves arrive at Byrgenwerth and break the ritual's secret, a cutscene plays showing the Blood Moon's interplay with the Moonside Lake. As the cutscene ends, the player character seems to fall down. From another angle, we can see this a little more clearly, in that they collapse face down as a wafer-thin moon approaches. At one point, a ghost carriage arrives at Hemwick, seeming to have come from a path that we know is broken. Taking the camera further out to sea, it does indeed float along the air for a certain distance before coming into the player's view. Boarding the carriage takes the player on a ride across the broken bridge to the forbidden Castle Cainhurst, and similar to its arrival in Hemwick, the carriage here also travels across the air for quite a distance, before a number of camera cuts orchestrate the scene in which the player disembarks. Reaching Martyr Ligarius shows his body thawing and awakening piece by piece. And it's interesting to see how this effect is achieved when we keep the camera relatively stationary throughout. After bringing the Crown of Illusions to Ligarius' seat, the Queen's chambers are revealed in a cutscene which uses heavy fog and snow effects to obscure the moment. If I keep the camera moving constantly, I can outrun the fog effects, which reveals somewhat predictably the fact that the Queen's chambers simply appear instantly out of nowhere. Elsewhere, in the Nightmare Frontier, comes a moment when Spider-Patch sneaks up on the player, shoving them into a lake of poison before scurrying away. The initial scene occurs from Spider-Patch's point of view, making this a great moment to check out from a different angle. It's not actually Spider-Patch, but a regular, albeit glowing red, Nightmare Apostle that comes out of nowhere and pushes us off.
Lucky scamp! The gift of the Godhead cometh!
When we follow the Blood Moon to Yahar'gul, eventually our trip is interrupted by the One Reborn, precipitated by a pack of Bell Maidens, and emerging from a black cloud that seems to obscure the moon. By looking at things from another angle, we can see exactly how this scene is composed, and that a second orb actually appears in front of the first from which the creature emerges. Eventually we meet Mikolaj, who's introduced in shadow,
Cause. Or some say cosm.
before dancing about a little and disappearing around a corner. Now we're able to see that he in fact wanders off further than you get to see, continuing to play a unique animation as he moves through the level geometry. In another nightmare, Ludwig makes an appearance. Using the free camera during his introductory cutscene doesn't reveal too much interesting. However, partway through his fight, Ludwig collapses and the moonlit greatsword falls from his back, restoring some clarity to his mind. Seen from another view, it's revealed that the sword actually pops up from the ground, casting the green glow we'd seen across Ludwig's face.
My true mentor, my guiding moonlight.
Shortly after this we find an elevator, the activation of which involves the symbolic placement of an eye inside the head of a statue. Usually seen directly from above, it's nice to get a chance to see things from a different angle, if little else. We meet Maria in the Astral Clock Tower in a fairly memorable cutscene.
A corpse should be left well alone.
From a variety of other angles, we see that her body doesn't quite move as elegantly as it was implied by the partial obscurity of the cutscene composition, including her hand being comically twisted 180 degrees at the wrist before flipping around to grab the player.
A corpse should be left well alone. Oh, I know very well how the secrets beckon so sweetly.
Getting to see her transforming trick weapon from the front is also a small treat.
Will kill you now. From your wild curiosity.
When the Orphan of Kos emerges, the scene is already reasonably horrific, leaving very little to the imagination. With the developer camera, we can see just how much Kos actually moves around the scene between camera cuts, which is something that was quite hard to notice otherwise. And by viewing the scene from beneath, we can see the various aspects of the Orphan's emergence that play into the whole effect. After defeating the Orphan, a scene plays out showing that the cosmic eye is no longer watching over the nightmare, and the sky is now clear.
The bottomless curse.
By taking control of the camera, you can see the moment the eye disappears as the camera cuts, which surprised me as I had assumed it wouldn't be there at all during the cutscene since it's never seen while it plays. Lawrence's introduction focuses on each part of his body slowly awakening before he steps forward towards the player. Once again, locking the camera in place lets us see how these individual moments are broken down across the scene. Returning to the nightmare of Mensis, Murgo's wet nurse swoops down from somewhere up high. And by starting with the camera zoomed way out, we can see from just how high up it comes. And so this brings us to the game's 3 endings, the first being Yharnam's Sunrise, where the player submits to Gehrman in the field of the Hunter's Dream, later waking up to see the morning sun over Yharnam's central plaza. The moment that Gehrman frees the player involves a lot of camera cuts, but I was able to at least get a look at the majority of it from fairly interesting angles. His arm and rifle seem to contort into an impossible direction as he readies his scythe. The scene in the Yharnam streets actually takes place floating in the sky above the Hunter's Dream, using a compartmentalized and constantly shifting version of Cathedral Ward. The area in which the player wakes up is basically the same as the area with the well to the left of Erden Chapel. However, after a camera cut, this well is spliced into the central plaza where we'd encounter a group of giants in Cathedral Ward. All the while the area is mostly incomplete, and the pillars of the Hunter's Dream can be seen down below. The game's second ending involves the player refusing to submit to Gehrman, so initially he rises from his chair and readies his weapon. The developer camera shows how Gehrman is actually teleporting around quite a lot throughout this scene and floating in the air during his final pose.
Oh, it doesn't matter. It always comes down to the hunter's helper to clean up after these sorts of messes.
After the fight, the ending cinematic shows the moon presence reveal itself, forcing the player to become the new wheelchair-bound host of the dream, seen from some angles to now be missing a leg. From other angles, we can get a bit of a look at the moon presence's descent more clearly. And the appearance of a missing leg is achieved by bending the player character's leg backwards 180 degrees at the knee. For the final scene, their leg returns to normal, as it can't be seen from this angle regardless. For the final ending, and thus the final cutscene in the game, the player rejects the moon presence, choosing to fight it instead. Afterwards, the doll comes to find the player, having become a new creature, where she picks them up and holds them for a moment.
Oh, good hunter.
Seen from another angle, her animation is a little weird when picking up the creature.
Are you cold? Oh, good hunter.
But we do get to see their final moment together up close this way. And so that brings us to the end of this analysis. I hope I managed to reveal some interesting aspects of how the developers created the cutscenes, and I hope I didn't destroy too much of the magic behind the game in doing so. I still have a lot more to show thanks to my restoration of the developer-free camera, but for now I hope you might choose to subscribe if you haven't already to keep up with what I'm working on going forward. If you did manage to enjoy this video, feel free to let me know by hitting the like button or even leaving a friendly comment below. For a behind the scenes look at how I create these videos, you can follow me on Twitter at manfightdragon, and you can find more ways to follow and support my work in the description of the video. Either way, thank you for watching, I'll see you next time.